So when we first started bodybuilding, there was much lesser choices, right? It was
Yeah.
bodybuilding, right? I think we had that. Novice, open, that's it. And then women were able to pick between bodybuilding, figure. There were, what was that other division with the acrobatic stuff?
Fitness.
Yeah, that made some rounds early,
Yeah.
but obviously it's like
I think that's still at
quite
the,
the filter.
yeah. I think that might still be at the Olympia, or maybe it was recently.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I'm sure
Um,
there's still because it's really
yeah.
interesting when you see it at a high
Yeah.
level.
It's
It's
kind of,
like,
it's like, oh,
can you
there's some
imagine that at the local
athleticism
level
still
though?
there. Yeah.
But yeah, um, but a part in that distraction, yeah, it was that simple, right? And I think for a lot of folks, I think in part, as much as an old head, it was hard for me to accept a new division, It does get more
Mhm.
people involved in the sport. And because what it did for me was like, once I wasn't a teenager, I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm not going to compete until like I look like a bodybuilder. So it ended up
Yeah.
being, I don't think it was necessarily a bad thing, but I just worked on that project from age 19 to age 24 is when I finally made it on stage. But now I think, yeah, with these new divisions, like you can kind of like grow within a specific division and then graduate, and that's got its perks, but it can make it a little bit more confusing for a beginner to navigate. Um, what do you think about all this, Ryan?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing that just came to mind was I wonder if the increased number of divisions, like adding men's physique into the mix, like would you have competed sooner had that happened?
No, 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 no.
Yeah.
No, I
So,
don't think
but
so.
I think there probably are situations where
Because you grew up with your heroes too, though, right? So
true. Yeah.
we saw
But I
Ronnie, we
guess
saw Jake.
if you could be a 24-year-old today or a 19-year-old today, I think there's an opportunity to compete sooner and still
Yeah,
do
yeah.
well. Which also can have its drawbacks if you're competing a lot early on when you could be growing. So, but for the most part, it levels out in the long run. But yeah, I'm the same. I liked when it was a little bit more simple, but it's definitely helping to expand the sport. With divisions like classic being added, I think that was a huge benefit for the untested side of the sport.
Mhm.
Like that was a
Yeah.
big win. Um,
That was what
on
they
the
were
natural
trying to
side,
do with men's physique. Like literally, like men's
yeah,
physique, they're like, let's bring this in, and then that got a little too crazy. And they're like, all right, this is what we actually meant,
yeah, yeah.
and now you have
It's
this.
just like
It's a wonderful division.
it is. It's an awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, it's my favorite division on that
Me
side
too.
of the sport. On the natural side, it's the difference probably more lies in the presentation and the posing, maybe than it does physique. I mean, you see a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
athletes crossing over within the same show, which tells you something, So, um, yeah, but I think the ways that we approach things as coaches when it comes to these different divisions, it's there might be some things that people overlook, but it in a lot of ways it might not differ in ways that some people might think. And so yeah, do you remember, I guess, when did you first prep like a men's physique athlete, and did you do anything different there?
Well, when men's physique first came around, I think a lot of people took it as like it's a transformation contest. So
Hmm.
I had a few athletes that I'm like, maybe competing isn't what we should be doing just yet. But if I don't get you, someone else is going to get you, and that can end quite poorly. So a lot of my first men's physique athletes, like they were like legit like dads that were like, I just want to look
Yeah,
good on the beach, but
yeah,
I also want to do it on the stage. So it was hard because again, just different times. We had to work on a lot of remedial skills as we were trying to prep safely. Um, but it also gave a home to guys who maybe naturally don't have the biggest legs. So I remember like getting some of those guys on board as well. But I think with them, it's crazy because like naturals now, like that used to be the saying is that naturals don't have legs. Whereas like when I think about like where we compare best, it's usually like the bottom half, right?
Yeah.
Then it was just because, back then the way leg day was drawn up was it's like Pukeville, it's like reps, it's junk volume, if you will. So then they hop on board. I'd give them something more sensible that's in line with the principles that we know work. And now they got legs all of a sudden. So they end up graduating to bodybuilding. But yeah, I think now that things are more settled, I do take the person's division into consideration, right? So like if they're doing figure, like it's like, okay, well, those delts, like we can't really ever like lay off the delts for like 95% of these women, right? Or men's physique, I'm not going to run, because some people, they just stay there now. Like that's just what they're going to do. Like Chris Elkins is always going to be a men's physique athlete. Makes no sense to have them like push quad volume up to like 20, 30 sets a week or something like that. So yeah, we do get a little bit more specialized, but I think a lot of these divisions, they end up being like the minor leagues for whatever it is they want to do long term.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how I look at it too, especially on the natural side, because you see a lot of people that, they start training and, they start gaining muscle, and it's rare. It seems more rare for a natural athlete who's a competitor to feel like they have too much muscle. Like most people are trying to get as jacked as they can, and then, on the enhanced side, that's less the case. I think more people are like, okay, this is like, I don't want to look like that.
Yeah.
And I think also sometimes, I know like the posing can play a role too in divisions that people are interested or not interested in doing, and that can shape, where they want. Maybe in terms of muscular development, they might be more in line with like the bikini division, sort of the, entry level aspect, in terms of like the conditioning and everything. But maybe they don't enjoy the presentation side of it, and that, that's totally fine. And so maybe they end up doing figure. But in both of those cases, usually, what we're still trying to get, as developed as we can in the areas that matter. So it's not like the sets and reps change or anything like that necessarily. It's more allocating that volume, maybe different exercise selection depending on some things. But
because I go back to maybe when I first started training, especially on the women's side, a lot of women would all they had was bodybuilding, right? So they would just, it's like, I guess the next 5-7 years, you're just like, you're getting developed, but you're also getting whipped, like within this division you're growing. So figure kind of offered a softer landing, right? And then you have even softer, like with bikini. So I think it works because at the end, it gives the athletes a chance to experience prep, experience these longer diets, like hone their skills, right? And obviously us on them as coaches, like we figure them out over time, but they also develop these coping strategies. And it's a lot nicer to go through that process and just be like, oh, okay, like I'm going to get a nice little trophy, a nice little reward at the end of it, as opposed to like, did women's bodybuilding again. And, I'm 18 years old. A lot of these women been training as long as I've been alive, and another did not place, right? So I like that aspect of the divisions.
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think. When somebody asks me, because I got this email actually this week from somebody.
Like, what am I?
Yeah, well, what division? If I were to compete, what division? And that's always a tough question to answer, and it's a lot of it I think comes down to just what the person wants to do. Even if they're underdeveloped to maybe place in bodybuilding, if that's where they it's like it's that or nothing, then they'll be, they'll be competing as a bodybuilder. But other things, I mean, typically, the divisions as they kind of get higher, let's say bikini, figure, bodybuilding, like the conditioning inches up a little bit with each, or, should on paper anyway. So sometimes those lower divisions, for somebody who's kind of on the fence, or they're not really ready to commit, 8 months to doing this, then maybe, one of the, more like men's physique or bikini could be a good entry point for them, even if they don't necessarily want to do that. But, they might want to do bodybuilding, but it's like, okay, let's be realistic. Are you wanting to prep for, 6 to 8 months? And they might not want to. In those cases, I think, okay, well, now this is probably your best bet. And if you want to compete still, great. If not, then maybe take some more time.
One thing we forget about bodybuilding is that it's a lot of things to different people, but for some folks, I don't know, it's like their tattoos, it's their body art, it's how they want to present and express that. So sometimes, like for me as a coach, like I'm like, when they ask me that question, like, what am I? I'm like, I don't know. What do you want to be? What do you see yourself as? Because that's really important, right?
Yeah.
Because I think me, 18, 19, you could have told me anything but like bodybuilder, I think. Just because, I was too influenced by like the Arnolds and the Lee Haney and the Ronnie Colemans. But so at the end, I don't know, it's you. How do you want to present this thing? And like within the confines of like, all these divisions, is there something that kind of like fits that? So, at the end, like, yeah, it's more like left up to the athlete. Like how do you want to do this thing? Because there's really no right or wrong. It's your work. It's your little project, or it's technically a project that it will actually never be perfect, no matter how many first places you might end up getting.
Yeah, I think that's usually the starting point for me, is seeing like, okay, where do you see yourself? And then from there, it's usually the follow-up question is like, where do you see me being most competitive? And I think a lot of, like, obviously everybody wants to do well when they compete, but if you're just getting into the sport, most people aren't winning their first shows. A lot of people aren't placing in their first shows, at least like in the open divisions, but that's why they have like novice divisions and like teen divisions and things like that. But, there does come a point where your physique suits one division more so than another. And you could either keep doing the division you were doing, and because that's what you enjoy, or maybe move to a different division. So usually at that point, I find people have probably already competed at some point, and you kind of know where they stack up when they're in stage shape, and what they actually need to work on. Because a lot of people, when they come to us wanting to prep for the first time, they might not be lean enough to really identify true weak points in their physique, and areas to bring up. And so getting them lean first is kind of oftentimes the first step in really knowing like, okay, this is the lay of the land, and now we can kind of pick and choose a little bit more strategically on the next season after that. But yeah, I think for most people, like the competitive aspect shouldn't be the primary focus when they start.
One of the perks of graduating from like one class to the next is that you the criteria gets a little bit more solidified. Like you will see this with like, for example, bikini, where it's really close. And as much as they tell you, like, don't be over muscular, like, don't be like too lean, it goes to the girl simply because it has like these muscle groups that maybe aren't super high priority, like in bikini, but she had better traps. I don't know. Like, great. That's definitely not a big component to
great upper
bikini.
Back or something. Yeah.
Well, it was just something like that, right? So, and it's that's what a lot of these classes default to when it gets hard. It's like, okay, who's the closest thing to like bodybuilding? And it's a little bit less frustrating when like in bodybuilding most of the time. Like I'd say 90-some% of the time. Like, if someone places ahead of you, you're like, okay, yeah, like per the
Yeah.
criteria, like, yeah, I'd absolutely have them over me. Whereas, yeah, things get a little bit more subjective in the sport. That's its main flaw anyways.
Yeah.
Things get more objective as you climb up the ranks. And then also in natural bodybuilding, there just isn't as much customization like within like the physiques.
Yeah.
With and especially with like women, like there's just so many more things that you can do. Um, like it's frustrating because sometimes like within the natural circuit, like you will see the classic physique and okay, they have their winner of the show, and it's like, bro, this dude would have clobbered like the open bodybuilder that won,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
unanimous, right? Like this makes no sense. Whereas that could never happen in the
Yeah.
IFBB.
Yeah.
Um, and a great example of this was about 15 years now. But like the women who were on this time it was bodybuilding and it was figure. That's what ruled the sport. Patricia Beckman and Terry McBee, they were twin sisters, and one was whipping everyone in bodybuilding, and the other one was whipping everyone in figure. These are identical
Yeah.
twins. They just presented it differently. So
Yeah.
and the thing is, like, you could take a lot of champions still to this day, like I think in like women's like bodybuilding. Yeah, we'll say bodybuilding. And you can like just kind of fine tune things, like whether it's what they're posing or don't get as hard.
Yeah.
In some cases, yeah, don't train that area like when we're super close to a show. And they would win. Like
Yeah.
they'd be world champions in those divisions.
Yeah.
Um so drugs completely changes this, like with the wellness division. Like it's crazy. A lot of these women, because your body's like its own parasite to itself, right? They're legitimately only training upper body like once or twice a month. Like that's not out of the question. And like
Yeah.
all the resources and energy go to the lower half. And I mean, that's why you get that look. And there's just, yeah, we just can't customize bodies the way you can when you're using drugs. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that someone needs to say like within like our world here, because a lot of inspiration, unfortunately, is pulled from that side.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. Because there is room for customization, but the ceiling is just much lower. And if anything, like if there is a large window for customization, it's over a longer period of time. It's not
A very long
like on
period of
a
time.
year-to-year basis necessarily. So, but maybe we can pivot into that. So with the training based off of division, like the general, I guess, thought it would be, in some of these like bikini, obviously like glutes and lower body, not overly developed quads. But you don't have like that. It's not as symmetrical as the other divisions in terms of like maxing out muscle growth across the board. So what that might look like is, as you alluded to, just having a lower frequency for the body parts that don't matter. There's not usually a muscle that like I won't ever have somebody train, a main muscle group anyway, but it's just kind of the dosing of that. So maybe, it could look like, okay, their lower body, 60% of their training is lower body, and maybe 60% of that or 70% of that is mostly like posterior focused versus quads. And so, and then maybe for the upper body, the majority of it's going to be, upper back and, arms, a little bit of delts, but there's not really a huge need for a bunch of like horizontal pressing and things like that in that division, in my opinion. But how do you go about doing that?
And this is where, again, it depends. Like if they are just here to change clothes, right? Or competing in bikini, but long term, they want to head in this direction, then it's going to look a little bit more balanced, right? But if this is where this is where they're chilling at, this is as of right now what they think they want to do with their bodybuilding, then yeah, we would probably do something more similar to that. I'd say probably across all divisions, with the exception of maybe the male divisions and Faker. I think the delts are just super slept on because they add so much symmetry to the upper body. So a lot of these girls who want to compete in bikini, and like they're like, this is my thing, this is where I want to be. Why am I getting so much like delt work? Because like I've seen Miss IFBB, like Miss Olympia, like train, and she doesn't do a whole lot of delt work, and it's like, well, we have a conversation that we went over earlier. How those things will grow for like no reason to the point where they literally don't train them, don't touch them, right? Your RDLs and holding your Smith machine squat is probably plenty of work. But it does add a certain level of elegance and flow to any division. So yeah, like everything you just said, with probably a little bit more delts than people would expect, unless they just happen to have that sort of structure where their delts are just like naturally capped, and then then we just kind of treat it like everything else on the upper half.
Yeah. So I guess the way I would approach like a figure versus a female bodybuilding, like there would be much less disparity there. I think it's mostly absolutely. It's like a mini version of a bodybuilder with different posing in a way. I mean, that's an oversimplified way to look at it, but
and in some cases they're just as muscular, like just as jacked, just as lean, but they just want to present it via the figure poses.
Yeah. And shout out Xena, who worked with us last year. I mean, she crossed over into both divisions. Was competitive in both divisions, but I think at the time preferred the figure. As like the primary division. But yeah, you can definitely be competitive in both if you have the physique for it, on the natural side especially.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, in diet, like I guess it would, because I think it's a little weird now because you have women's bodybuilding and then you have figure girls. Like it's basically, they're as muscular and symmetrical, and in many cases just as like lean, in fact, to the point where it's like, hey, don't squeeze your butt. Careful how you walk on that stage, because we don't want to see those glute striations, like maybe the judges don't. Like I think it's like you earned those, but like maybe the judges don't. So like just ease up on that walk, right? So like the training is not that different, I'd say.
No.
Probably you just can't have a weak back. So unless you're super gifted there, we're probably going to be specialized as this your project for life. Delt's kind of the same thing. Like when I think of figure, like that's what I think of. I think of like these upside down triangles, right?
Yeah.
And order of operation, in my opinion, I'd say hamstrings and glutes probably matter more than quads, maybe, because there's just something about having that area small that, especially if you're going to be conditioned, it's just, even though it's not necessarily the case, it tells you, like leg extension warrior, they are, they have a bad work ethic, right? Even though more complicated than that, folks. So yeah, it's always to be delts and back that you're really trying to specialize in, even if it's not necessarily genetically a bad area for you. And then probably glutes, hammies. Quads, I mean, it's a coin toss between them and quads, because quads really, really look nice compared to a good pair of delts. I guess the only difference is like you just don't train arms as much.
Yeah.
You don't have to, right?
Yeah.
But it's basically bodybuilding.
Yeah, and I guess if you're unsure, I mean, it doesn't mean take arm training out of your program if you're in that division, but if you feel like it's like they're developing too quickly or taking away, then that's when you would pull back. But I think somebody entering the sport who's unsure, get as jacked as you can, and then you can kind of refine from there.
You do everything, You train head to toe, like, and you wait until early advanced, late intermediate to decide what I specialize in. But yeah, these
'Cause
girls are
even at,
bodybuilders to me, man. They are jacked.
yeah, even at the like at WMBF Worlds, I mean, there's a difference between the figure and women's bodybuilding. Like the higher the level gets, there's more discernible differences. But even then, like you said, it's not much, and a lot of it, the conditioning side of it is relatively similar, maybe a few percent higher in the bodybuilding divisions, but it's also the way they're presenting it to highlight that, like you said. So,
Like, to give you an idea, this brought a smile on my face, man, because I remember when I did my pro debut, there was this woman on the panel. Her name was Mary Ford, a successful bodybuilder in her own right. She did figure. We had a very similar stage weights and similar heights. So I was a rookie, but nevertheless, like, she was like 5'9", 5'10", and she's up there like somewhere in the 150s.
Yeah.
In really good shape.
Muscular.
She was amazing. Anyhow, these girls it's just like, when in doubt, train everything. Like, go hard. You don't want to do the hip thrust or the booty stuff because it's like, I don't want to identify with that crew. It's like, no, you gonna need that as well. Like everything. And the posing, since there's much less poses, I'd say the margin of error is even greater because you only have so many weapons to use. So it's like, you can't have a weak one, like for bodybuilders, sometimes you can get a little lackadaisical and be like, my side poses or whatever, I got a bad side chest. My side try will get me. Nah, not in figure. Like, you gotta milk everything. But yeah, I guess bodybuilders, maybe a little bit less arms is probably closing statements for that division.
Hey, 3DMJers, Andrea Valdez here, popping in with a quick announcement that we have just released our latest course in the 3DMJ Vault titled Macros into Meals, a practical guide to eating for lifters. This one was created by two of our head coaches, Brad Loomis and Jeff Alberts. And in it, they'll be teaching you how to create a full day of eating based on your calorie targets, macro targets, athletic goals, energy needs, and overall lifestyle. Macros into Meals is sort of the next nutritional step we wanted to add into the Vault VIP membership to be taken after our 3 other foundational dietary courses. So athletes can progress through these lessons by first taking nutrition fundamentals for lifters, then calculating your calories, then calculating your macros, and then finally this course, Macros into Meals. Our goal is to continue building upon previous lessons so that the Vault remains robust and continues to grow with athletes as they acquire more skills and progress through their careers. Macros into Meals is now the 27th course in the 3DMJ Vault, which is our online learning platform of organized video-based education for serious lifters. You can get all access to all courses with a one-time purchase of a lifetime VIP membership or a one-time purchase of a single-year VIP membership. Either way, as of 2024, this is not a recurring subscription any longer. You choose your single purchase option, and you get to see everything for a year or for life. You'll get foundational training courses also, like personalizing your program, bodybuilding program design, and the lifting library. And you'll also get more specific accessory courses for training and nutrition, like the Advanced Deload Guide, Transitioning Away from Tracking, the Godfather's Guide to Posing, the Lagging Body Parts course, the Physique Photo Guide, and more. Head on over to 3dmjvault.com and sign yourself up for a VIP membership today. That's 3dmjvault.com to get all access. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
This just kind of popped into my head. If you're unsure, like you want to prep, let's say my goal is to compete in 3 years. I don't know what division, but this whole thing is intriguing and I want to try it out. What you could do, like we said, is just train, put on as much muscle as you can. And then you could use that prep, like if by then you know what division you're going to do, that's when maybe the training during prep could shift a little from where it is in the off season potentially.
Oh yeah.
But I think for that's most people, like if you're locked into one division, then train for that, division, once you're past intermediate stage, I would say. But yeah, if somebody,
Because you want to
could pull back
protect
the
those
frequency,
qualities, right?
yeah. Let's say, okay, my quads, I decided I wanted to do bikini, and my quads are more developed than I want. Then you can use prep to kind of pull back on that, and you retain a little bit more through your glutes, and I think that's one way you could go about it without going all in on one division in the off season.
Yeah, yeah. Because again, at the end, it's like these women who bodybuild, like if they wanted to, in many cases, they could just sign up for the other events and just pose
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
modify their diet a little bit, and they'd win.
Yeah.
I
think
there's
one
just less
takeaway
customization.
one takeaway we're having is like you don't need to train for one division necessarily,
Yes.
especially
Yeah,
if you're
yeah.
early on in the sport. I think that's because there's a significantly lower ceiling for customization. Then you want to at least keep your options open by not over specializing too early, I would say, because a lot of people, like you said, there's a lot of female competitors who don't really intend to do figure or bodybuilding. They start out doing bikini. They love it. They're like, wow, getting strong, this is awesome, or the whole process of lifting, and they catch the bug, and then they're like, okay, I want to put on a little bit more muscle. And so your mind may change, at those early stages. And so I think it's good to, have a well-rounded program in the off season for that
Well, and at
reason.
the end, like this is for you, right? It goes back to that. So like I don't know if you compete bikini, but like you happen to be a monster bench presser, and you get a lot of joy out of that, right? Like here you are bench pressing, I guess, an early intermediate 1.5 times your body weight for reps. It's like, okay, like maybe like don't throw this out. Right? It's just it eventually just becomes real fun to train everything. Right? And sometimes it's a totally different conversation. Like, how do I train for myself to keep me happy? And then there's like, the sport and competing. I think those two, they can be totally different things. I enjoy RDLing. I enjoy I like leg work, right? But it's like probably the last thing I need. Guys with much better legs than me, but within myself, it's probably the last thing I need. But I enjoy those movements, so I go just as hard. So yeah, just it's definitely a trap you don't want to fall into. And like you said, maybe when you are competing, okay, things can, like you're in the middle of a prep, you can kind of, move things around to
like almost like selective mild atrophy. So
yeah.
pulling back.
Well, because you're screwed if you're like, oh, you know what, these capped outs, like I had to work real hard to get them. And then most of the times, if that's how it works, what's hard to get on the way up is it goes first, right? So maybe let's protect those because you compete in figure, right? But yeah, I guess we're kind of going in order. But then there's that bridge, like everything after figure, which I think for a lot of women's like kind of like no man's land. It's like the jungle. There's no more weight classes, right? Brandon Lily's there, just like whispering the old motto. But yeah, I think at that point it's just all bodybuilding presented differently, and like you train them no different than how you would train a Brad Loomis, a Jeff Alberts. Just like we want everything. And we want to diet long, and we want to see every muscle group. And it's just no holds barred. Like literally the criteria becomes very simple to try to maximize all bars, the muscularity, the symmetry, the conditioning. Although, the addition of like the heels and certain poses can distract from that. But at the end, it's bodybuilding, man.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, it might just need longer prep, and so anybody at that
you're going there
advanced level,
you're signing up for something nasty. It's like from a conditioning perspective, it's like you want all the smoke, man.
And you want to plan ahead for that. So if you have aspirations of competing as a bodybuilder, like it should probably be on your calendar. Like you should be thinking about it at least a year out, I would say. It doesn't mean you're prepping a year out, but putting yourself in a position or have a good idea of where you're supposed to be when in order to have a fairly seamless prep. And that's true for every division, but I think especially for bodybuilding, there's just less wiggle room. I mean, we've all been to shows where you see somebody who's phenomenal who just needed like 3 more pounds of fat loss to win the whole damn show. And then they end up not placing, because those fat stores are maybe in areas that are just a little bit more stubborn. It's more noticeable in that regard, harder to overlook. But like I know I could never do men's physique. I would have to get as lean as I do for bodybuilding just with the fat distribution patterns. But yeah, I mean, we can, do you want to kind of pivot and talk about the men's side or touch on that? I mean, a lot of the same principles apply here.
Yeah. I have so many of I forget this, about my men's physique guys are like, I forget they want to bodybuild. And I'm like, man, you can do one body. And they're like, really? And I'm like, bro, you didn't know this? Like, you didn't know this? Like, what?
I didn't know I was allowed.
Here. Yeah. I thought you were here, by choice. Because again, for some people, they're like, I watched Jeremy Buendia growing up and that's what I want to do. Cool, right? To me, it's like it's the difference between, I don't know, boxing, MMA, right? Combat sports, different rules, different games, kind of, but a lot in common too. So yeah. Generally, most everyone wants to train everything. It's kind of crazy. Like there's very few guys that are men's physique athletes that not necessarily that I coach, but that I know of and I'm friends with, that I have a general idea of how they train, that really just prioritize like the upper body. They do everything and they pick that division because they want to bodybuild. They want to train like bodybuilders, but their fat distribution, like that's a big one. It's like to get the legs in, it's 12 pounds. They're like 14 weeks of dieting and it sucks. Yeah, I think that's the biggest one. I think with men is probably just how hard it is to get the lower body to come in. So it's not just something that, we talk about that with women a lot, but I think the same thing with men. I think everyone just has a general idea. It's almost dogmatic that like all men are like lower, I guess, upper body fat dominant, and women are the exact opposite. When that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I think, as a rough average probably, but
within you break that up into sections. Like for us, getting our lower half to come in never really been an issue. And even
so
Eric,
like Eric,
who we thought, and he's kind of in the early stages of that. Like there's still guys that they're like, bro, no, he's got it easy, Oh yeah. But
he gets his midsection leaner before his lower half. Yeah, for sure. Do we want to talk about like dietary strategies for any of these and how that can vary?
Yeah, because the men's is just like, it's so simple, man. Men, it's just, they all want to train the same for the most part, And I'd say the only difference, but this has been like the community as a whole, is just they've enjoyed it more. I think now it's almost taboo to be one of those guys. It's like, hey, why are you always skipping leg day? Like that used to be a big part of the male population. Now you got the hoochie daddy shorts. Like it's part of the culture. It's like they train everything now. So most men's physique, I guarantee if we pulled all the guys at WNBF Worlds, like sensational physiques, top of their sport, they train everything just as hard. Yeah. And they got there because getting those legs to come in, being as lean as you have to be for that bodybuilding division, especially within like natural bodybuilding. It's conditioning is the one thing we take very seriously. That's at this point in their life, it's asking for a lot. So they'll do this in the meantime. So yeah, I guess dietary strategies, kick that off for us, Brian.
The timeline kind of goes hand in hand with diet. And so for bodybuilders, usually, the diet is going to be longer. Not always, but oftentimes. Depends on where somebody starts. But, that also depends, like we were talking about with fat distribution. Like if I did a men's physique show, I would probably have a 25-week prep, whereas somebody, like Eric, if he did that, I mean, he gets his upper body, like men's physique lean, probably halfway through prep or,
Yeah.
pretty close. So that's, if you've never worked with somebody before, it's good to kind of err on the side of caution and have a buffer there. Because sometimes you don't know what somebody's body fat distribution is really until the end. And you're like, oh, wow, I didn't expect this to be coming off last.
Yes.
So that's good to have that buffer in place. But I think, as far as the X's and O's of dieting, the goal is still to maintain as much muscle mass as you can on the way down. So, losing at a reasonable conservative pace. Usually like if I look at athletes I've prepped, usually I try to plan on an average rate of loss somewhere around like 0.5%, knowing that like that's going to be higher potentially at the beginning of prep, and by the end it might be 0.2, or if these are just rough averages. There's obviously going to be volatility there, but when planning the timeline, like a 0.4 to 0.5% average to just sort of establish how much runway you need, I think is a useful way. And then you can add in like a buffer for diet breaks, eating into the show, and things like that. But, for most guys, things aren't necessarily going to change. We might just end up competing a little bit sooner, than they would if they were doing bodybuilding, if they're doing physique. Now, if they're doing classic, it's probably going to look the exact same as bodybuilding. And the differences there, really at the natural level, the differences there are primarily in the posing. Like that, let's be real. Like it's not a different strategy. It's a different presentation for the most part. And
I'd just say they're probably better because you have way less weapons because there's just less poses. So if you're like, all I need is this to present like my thesis statement here, you're probably really good at bodybuilding. You should probably just do open, but carry on, Brian.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think more the differences in approach may lie on the female side. And I guess it's more differences compared to the male side rather than between divisions. Like between divisions on the female side, it's mostly timeline related and just giving ample time to get the necessary body fat off. But differences between males and females, on average, like females have it harder on average. They're lighter, they burn less calories through physical activity. Their basal metabolic rates on average going to be a little bit lower.
Their biological unit, they're just more valuable. Like
exactly.
Your body's going to, if your woman wants to keep you, whereas like you only need one really happy dude in the village and we're cool. That's what we're so dispensable, right? And it shows. So I'd say with women, that is something that it's just worth understanding early on, because our side effects are very, not to underplay, because things get complicated with like body image things, right? But there's a good chance we probably didn't have as much of that like leading up to the point that we prepped, right? Or like we've all had like transient eating disorders here at some point. We're like, man, I was acting a little funny around food, but that's usually resolved a lot easier. I think so. With women, it's definitely something that you want to do the appropriate prerequisite work so that when we do kind of send you off into that jungle, you're well prepared. So like some of my toughest athletes are women who like they're so resilient, like work and life, and you throw all these things at them, and they come back with like, here's my folder coat, I've handled my business, right? Yeah. But they probably did a lot of that remedial work on the front end, a lot of that habit building, a lot of that exposure therapy that fat loss like really is. And this is something that I've been thinking about, is just, like I think, and you get really lean too, Brian. And I think a lot of folks, they come to us and they're like, wow, you guys are like really tough, really blue collar, really get after it. But it's hard to, I guess, take credit for that when like your own personal experience could be just so different. Like you have your own subset of privileges. Like I imagine when Michael Johnson like ran the 400 meters, his legs didn't burn the way like yours and our legs would burn, right?
Yeah.
It was something different. He was working hard, no doubt, but his experience was different. And in general, like the experience for women is just going to be a little bit rougher. And that's why you have to be patient and don't rush into things that they might not even be your goals. You know, like how many people do we know that they thought they wanted to compete? That's who they were. And at the end, it's like, oh, that wasn't even my goal. And I was like risking some really important things, people, moments in my life to, get this accomplished that at the end didn't really matter. So it gives you time to sort that out too. So yeah, if you can get with a good coach and like just figure out what remedial courses you have to take or whatever division you might be looking to compete, that's probably the safest way to bodybuild.
Yeah.
Best way to do it. And a lot of people might realize that they're just as, she signed up to be a bikini chick and here she is, she's bench pressing almost twice her body weight, having a damn good time, and her doesn't got abs, but who cares, right? So.
Yeah, it's like the behavioral infrastructure is especially important. It's important for everybody, but I think especially for females. And, like navigating, as far as like the X's and O's of dieting, navigating plateaus with females, it can be tougher to break through those because they have a smaller amount of calories to pull from. Adherence is going to be the number one factor. So we don't want to pull so much from food where, that it's not sustainable. But on the flip side, there's only so far expenditure can take us, which means if you're going to have to diet slow and keep energy available, like put yourself in a deficit and mitigate any reduction in energy availability as you can, it's just going to take a longer period of time. There's really no other way to go about that. And so, you almost have to accept a slower rate of loss than you would for a male in many cases. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, the return is a lot smaller for every unit of effort. And again, it's like we haven't talked about this. Like usually, because they're smaller, like more on average, more cardio can be used. And like you and I, if we had to do 7 hours of cardio a week, like we'd feel it, man. Like week 3 of that, we'd acclimate a little bit, but you feel it. Whereas like, whereas for someone who is like, like say 60-70% of your size, like they're just floating through it. They just chow through it. And it's a great way to leverage that. But again, it's one of those things where if you've never seen that before, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Right? It's like we probably had these practice diets beforehand where it's like, all right, you got 4 hours of cardio to do every week. You figure out a way to make this happen because at some point we might have a timeline and they're not going to move the show because X, Y, and Z happened in your life. Learn to make that fit. Learn to fold when you have to fold. All these things, right? So you build there gradually, but at the end with women, like you will see calories being numbers that I imagine is very similar to drug dosages like within the IFBB, where it's like we know the cost of doing business. By the time you get to this point, it's because you've decided as an adult, this is what I want to do. But a lot of the times with women and competing, you will see numbers that if Popular Fitness saw it, or someone who just has a surfacey understanding of what it takes to get there, they would be appalled, call you cruel. She has an eating disorder. And bodybuilding's the worst sport ever, and we should make it illegal. Things can get pretty frightening. Not forever, right? But like for these windows of time, calories can be quite low. Cardio can be really high, especially with women. You'll see numbers that just seem cruel. But again, if you've done this right, you've rehearsed this like during other practice diets, potentially other preps where you as a coach are like, this is as far as we're going this time, and then next time, usually you get here and this will seem like nothing and we'll be able to push on. So, but it's so crazy, right? Because like with other sports, I don't know, like pitch counts, like for high school kids, it's like we keep track of that because we don't want to mess up their long term. And that's a very important part of coaching. They're not kids, you're raising adults because they are juveniles like within this sport, right?
Mhm.
And that's with women especially, like you can't skip steps. You can't skip steps. And I wish there was more buy-in when it came to doing it this way up front, because you could fuck up someone's life to the point where 10 years they were taken away and they were just like lost, and their body to them didn't work well when it did exactly what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, it can be a challenge for sure. And I think making sure they're competing for the right reasons, first off, is important. I mean, it's important for, men and women. But, one thing that I think I don't like that this is a reality, but it often isn't discussed, is that if we're, in an effort to keep things like energy availability higher for females, and we only have so much we can pull or add in terms of cardio to be effective, because it usually results in maybe a slower average rate of loss week to week. What that also tends to mean is there's a much lower margin of error when it comes to adherence.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So they have it. I mean, there's, if you put a guy out of the gate, like in an 800 calorie deficit, and they're, losing, 1% a week or whatever, it's like they could slip up and still have a net positive day, and so that oftentimes just simply isn't the case with some females, which sucks. Like that, they just have to really be on it. And
the
guys
numbers
should
don't
be
even
too.
scale right. Like they don't even scale the way you think they would.
Yeah.
Like it's really unfair. It really is. It just goes to show you how powerful hormones are, right?
Yeah. Just,
I mean, you were eating a whole bag of unaccounted food during a prep.
Yeah.
You kind of knew this, but you two parts of your brain, your logical side was like, no, this is okay. Let's keep eating it.
Yeah. But I was still losing like at a good pace.
You were.
So
you were. Yeah.
It's like, all right, we'll just pretend this is a constant. But yeah, those inaccurate tortilla chips. But ultimately what that meant was, my maintenance intake is probably much better than I think it is. And do you remember that last prep, I went through that phase with the Icon Meals popcorn. Do you remember those?
Yes.
The protein popcorn?
Yeah.
So it wasn't so outrageous, the label at the time, where it wasn't believable.
Yeah.
But after that prep, I noticed, unless they changed the formula for the worse, like they updated their label, and I was having like, a little bag of that every refeed day. And I mean, the label, once they updated it, was like 400 more calories. It was something substantial, so it was like, okay, well, that didn't seem to matter at the time. So it's just like, okay. But my goal,
with women in processed food today, we get to the point I'm like, we just can't have those, because for the most part, there's going to be some changes between like some differences between these apples, but generally speaking, same species, they can be about the same. Whereas like labels are just labels, as they say in the pre-workout world, right? So no one's really going to check on tortilla chips or, like macro-friendly popcorn. So just got to be careful, right?
Yeah. I can't remember exactly how much of a difference it was. It might
you might be running at your deficit, might be 100 calories. Like towards the end of the prep
exactly. Yeah. So the more simple you can make the diet, oftentimes the better. Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of that. Next time I prep, I'll just everything will be accounted for, and
I think
I'll just knock it out in like 8 weeks.
That's what it is. It's all you're underreporting.
No, I had it pretty easy.
But it kind of goes to show, there's just so much to learn as a noob. Like if you're just getting into like this year, so many traps. It's not just like what division am I? You know, it's not like getting your 23andMe is like a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Like that's not how it works. Like there's just so much to learn, so much to expose yourself to. You have to like raise yourself right as an athlete. Like learn your fundamentals, take all those remedial courses. Because otherwise, man, yeah, it's great sport. But if you're in the wrong class at the wrong time, I'm not just talking about like bodybuilding class, but like you're sitting in a class like year 3, year 4, like engineering school, and you don't even never really pass algebra, you're gonna be fucked, bro. And you're gonna feel terrible about your work ethic and self-efficacy and so on.
And many
and so on.
times, I mean, to be honest, many times it seems like that's a result of people jumping into competing without really learning what's required. And so I think all of us as coaches, like we try to be pretty straightforward with expectations of like, this is like, it's almost like I almost try to sell someone out of prepping first to see if they're actually serious about doing it.
Because they've had these conversations with themselves if you know, if they're being an adult about it, right?
Yeah. So it's you want to be very clear and understand what to expect. Because it's not like it's not something you just decide to do. Like, okay, there's a show in a few weeks, you know, I should hop in. You know, it's not like that. It can be a pretty, you know, if it's not part of your lifestyle, it will be it'll be a rude awakening, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, the way it used to go, it was like gym rats would just kind of get discovered in gyms, right? It's like someone's on like year 12 of their training and eating, right? They just love the lifestyle and they've heard it enough times where they're like, all right, let's go. So that was pre-social media, of course.
Yeah. And that's one thing social media, I think, it's been detrimental for in some ways, because I think a lot of people will get to a level of development, or, you know, they've been training for a few years and they're like, okay, now if I'm going to keep training, like this is the next step, you know, like if I'm serious about training, I have to compete. And that's not true.
No. Some of the best athletes just had they weren't about that. And then finally they're like, all right, I need that next mountain, but their base was informed within the pressures of competing.
Once they retired from real sports.
Yeah, I made a reel a few weeks back about like how many preps, like how many failed preps there are, and a lot of people didn't believe it. And I'm like, no, like that is 100. Like I'll bet the house on that, because like I know people who they've never prepped, and then you ask them like, oh, because they have a good physique, and they're like, oh, I've aborted mission like 4 or 5 times. You know. Like that's, or anyone, you know, especially around gym circles. Like I know that if someone's going to start a prep, there's about a 50% chance they're not going to finish it.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
What else do you got?
No, it's just, it's hard to be a noob, man. So many divisions, so many classes to sit on, so many things to learn, which it's hard to learn and do it under the like, competitive pressure, right? Like I've come to realize that, we just learn and absorb best like when we feel like safe, non-threatened. Like it's not how you feel when you're prepping, dude. Like I don't care how many times you've done this. When you're like 12 weeks out, 8 weeks out, you start to feel that pressure, bro. Like it's just not a great environment in which you learn and gamify the thing, because that's all it really is at the end. It's a game. You learn the rules, and play within your level, and you're gonna have a good time. So. Yeah, I think that's where the discussion should go when we talk about like, what class do I, you know, belong in? It's like, okay, I'm glad you asked that, because that's a can of worms, actually.
Yeah. Now I can just send you this link.
Yeah.
To this YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's start with eating veggies. That's what you're going to do this year. Yeah.
Let's increase your fiber to 10.
Yeah. All right, now we'll leave it there. I think we gave him a lot to munch on. Yeah, no, appreciate it, you guys, especially you new folks that like sat through this whole thing, because it's not until like you get to a certain point and you're like, oh shoot, I have to go back and pick up on this skill, that you can I guess, appreciate a lot of the things that we said. And I know this because I've done it, where I've gone ahead of myself, and there was something at my base that was my bottleneck. So, all right. Later, guys.
All right. Thank you.